If there's one thing that made the 5th generation of consoles unlike any other, it was the unceasing rat race to create the best platforming hero. So allow me to reintroduce Argonaut Software, who were coming hot off the success of Star Fox, which along with the Super FX chip, revolutionized console gaming and made way for the rise of dedicated 3D graphics. The early to mid-90s saw them primarily in the service of Nintendo, but come 1995, the relationship would all but fizzle out, thanks to things like the cancellation of the highly anticipated Star Fox 2. The studio's next big success would instead come in the form of this little guy, Croc, and it probably didn't take you too long to notice that he bears an incredible resemblance to another hero lizard. The green, the eyes, the tail. That's right, you took one look at this here reptile and thought of only one other video game character. Gex!
It's tail time!
I'm just yanking your chain, it's obviously Yoshi. And it seems to be known by most everyone that this isn't a mere coincidence, as once upon a time, Argonaut intended to develop not only the first 3D Mario game, but one that would star Yoshi nonetheless. What exactly this game would have been is a little up in the air. I've read that it was pitched as a kart racer, but also as a platformer. Point is, they made their intentions clear, and while the boys at Nintendo were all very much intrigued, they were ultimately met with a pat on the head and a swift no. Cause Nintendo was already knee-deep in developing Super Mario 64, and personally, I feel like they weren't too keen on risking another Star Fox 2 scenario. You know, where two very different games are being developed, but one could possibly detract from the other. Also, the last time they let any outsiders toy around with Mario stuff, it led to this. But Argonaut were always trying to innovate in one way or another, and rather than simply cut their losses and move on to something else, they decided to instead rework what they already had into something brand new. The result of this was of course Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, a cute little platformer that found its way onto not only the PlayStation, but also the Sega Saturn and Microsoft Windows. Now you guys know how I roll, we're gonna be dealing with the PlayStation version, but while the 3 ports are all very much the same, there are a few notable differences between them, and I figure they're worth a quick mention. First up is the Saturn port. Now, the Sega Saturn was infamous for being a 2D powerhouse that, while indeed capable of rendering in 3D, was often met with varying levels of satisfaction. Croc seems to have hit the sweet spot when it comes to this. Graphically, it's nigh identical to its PS1 counterpart, save for running at a lower resolution and having mesh shadows thanks to the Saturn not being able to render transparent objects. However, it does make use of the VDP2 chip, which was of course the console's secondary processor, to incorporate a few snazzier effects for things like lava. And alongside memory card support, it also makes use of the Saturn's internal backup, which is incredible considering this was 1997 and very much not of the time. What was of the time, however, were password systems, which was actually something hidden away in this port, though it being front and center would have been redundant seeing as even if you didn't purchase a memory card for the Saturn, everything you needed was already built in. As for the PC version, it's often remarked as having the best graphics, so it's safe to say that bad taste has officially prevailed. After all, you're watching this video, aren't ya? It's also the only one to run on the B-Render engine, which was created in-house by Argonaut and used to power games like their very own FX Fighter and even Carmageddon. And just when you think that's all there is to talk about, you find that it also has a super dedicated fanbase that have not only tweaked it to run on modern operating systems, but also added full controller support, enhanced lighting, and even the option to run it in native 4K. Still, it's this PS1 version that's considered the best, so rather than spring for all of that fancy stuff, I'm opting to go with PlayStation controller support, basic lighting, and an HD resolution that's been upscaled from 240p. What can I say? I love me some crispy polygons. Oh, right! This game was published by Fox Interactive, an almost decade-spanning venture that saw numerous 20th Century Fox properties receiving video game tie-ins. I'm talking titles like The Tick, Die Hard, and even Alien Resurrection, which was handled by none other than Argonaut. As odd of a choice as it may seem, the decision to go with them as a publisher was actually genius, since their multimedia influence made it a safe bet that Croc would go far beyond the realm of video games. In fact, there were actually plans to create an animated series, though none of them ever came to fruition. However, seeing what became of the Rayman TV show, you could argue that old Crocky here was spared from a fate most horrible. Still, Fox did very well by Argonaut, treating gamers everywhere to a hell of an advertising campaign. That's right, kiddos, Croc's here, and he's got a belly full of archaeologist, bandicoot, and plumber. A true three-course meal of sorts, consisting of Australian, British, and Italian cuisine. And it's probably just the cynic in me, but I can't help but feel like this was sort of definitely a dig against Nintendo, though what do I know? All I'm saying is, those shoes along with those pistols could belong to anyone, but that red hat is iconic in and of itself. So after this cute little splash screen with these little fuzzy dudes, we're introduced to the story proper, as one day upon the forest island of Gobbos, King Rufus discovers baby Croc floating in a basket. We're then treated to a passage of time within which he's taken in by them and taught their ways, until a dastardly villain named Baron Dante and his band of cronies appear, capturing the Gobbos and locking them in cages. Being the only one left, Croc realizes that it's up to him to save the day, quickly setting out to stop the evil Baron and free the Gobbos. Standard fare by all means, but I think it's got a lot of charm. What's interesting is that the game itself just kinda shows you what happens. You've gotta seek out the manual to get the full story, like King Rufus being lactose intolerant, or how it was tradition for the Gobbos to put kitchen utensils down their pants. A practice that was taken very seriously, until the year of the electric can opener. Anyway, let's get to the real meat and potatoes here, shall we? It's no secret that this game is a 3D platformer, and one of the earlier ones at that. Taking a page out of Super Mario 64's book, it's presented in a sort of panoramic fashion, meaning Croc can go almost anywhere within the established limits of levels. He can of course do a basic jump and attack enemies with a tailspin, which is very reminiscent of Gex, as well as perform a stomp move to destroy objects. Other than that, he's also capable of climbing certain walls and even swinging around on monkey bars. It's a very solid foundation to build upon, so it's a shame that it falls so utterly flat upon its face thanks to the controls. See, having presumably been in development before even Mario 64, Argonaut had no real frame of reference to go off of when designing the game, so in order to tackle what would have been a monumental challenge in nailing the movement, they sprung for the only real thing that made sense: tank controls. Now, tank controls aren't inherently bad, it's all in the way they're used, but the fact of the matter is, the genre of games that featured them most prevalently was survival horror, and even then, it was because of the pre-rendered backgrounds and also the limitations the control scheme offers. Alone in the Dark wouldn't be nearly as stressful if you could just go wherever while being attacked, and the same thinking applies to just about any of those games. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, doesn't matter. That isn't to say there haven't been a few platformers that have made it work, Jumping Flash being the first to come to my mind, but it's generally viewed as a major no-no. However, my frustration doesn't stem from Argonaut having made a mistake they couldn't have possibly predicted. That wouldn't be fair. It was 1997, and 3D game design itself was still a mammoth of a mystery. And to their credit, they did implement a few things to try and lessen the load, like a 180 quick turn button and also the option of playing with the analog sticks. Though it isn't true analog, and believe it or not, wasn't added until the 11th hour. In fact, throughout almost the entirety of development, the controls were fashioned with the Sega Saturn controller in mind, meaning right out of the gate, Croc was always intended to be played with a D-pad. So even though you can choose to play with the sticks, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should, especially when doing so means sacrificing what little flow there is, just so you can control the camera and convince yourself that you're not playing with tank controls while playing with tank controls. Either way, it feels less like controlling a bipedal character and more like driving a car. Sure, you can slowly meander backwards, but the only real way to go is forward. And while Croc can turn left and right, the camera, which again is uncontrollable unless you play with the analog sticks, more or less dictates the direction of travel. Remember how this game is said to have started out as a Yoshi kart racer? Well, I think I might have found the parts they left in. While the general chore of wrestling with Croc and the in-game camera isn't too much of a pain in the ass, it all comes tumbling down when you're met with the many precision platforming bits. Again, there are things done to try and alleviate the burden, like being able to grab ledges, change the camera position, and even use the shoulder buttons to do small sidesteps. The issue is, none of it guarantees success, and most of the deaths, which, mark my words, there are a lot, are never the product of cunning design, and are more often than not thanks to faulty control. It also doesn't help that while airborne, Croc handles differently. Like, check it out. When on the ground, the shoulder buttons can do one of two things. If Croc is standing still, they move him from side to side, and if he's running, you can use him to get a sort of drift thing going. However, it's only when Croc is in the air that they instead rotate him, as the D-pad now moves him around. It all makes for a very slow-paced platformer. You've got to pause and make sure everything's in place, really taking a moment to plan out exactly what you're going to do well in advance. Sure, there are a few unwelcome curveballs like moving or breakable platforms, but it's because of those smaller things like the sidestep and ledge grab that no matter how tedious it may be, it's all at the very least doable. The same cannot be said about the swimming, which is as awkward as it looks. Thankfully, there aren't any wholly underwater levels, but even just the brief sections of them are enough to drive anyone mad. The turning's super delayed, so it's next to impossible to grab stuff in one fell swoop, and depending on how you hit the button, Croc's movement ranges from lightning quick to slow as molasses. You know, it's really incredible that despite being a crocodile, he's such a poor swimmer. But alright, enough about that, let's get things back on track. The main goal of the game is getting from the start of a level to the finish. It's along the way you can pick up these here gem doohickeys that act as Croc's health bar a la Sonic. Taking any sort of damage sees them flying all over the place, but any that make it to the results screen are then added to a pool of sorts with 100 granting Croc an extra life. However, the main collectibles are the Gobbos, with a total of 6 being hidden in each level. 5 of them will be out in the open, usually collected after completing a puzzle, but the 6th and final is always behind a locked door that can only be opened after Croc has gathered the level's 5 colored crystals, which, while often stored away in these very Mario-like question blocks, can also be hidden among the normal bunches. These final rooms are often very straightforward and see Croc having to play a type of minigame, be it catching stuff with a cauldron or stepping on buttons. There are 5 worlds, or islands overall, the first 4 of which have 6 normal levels and 2 boss fights, as well as 2 secret bonus stages that are unlocked after saving enough Gobbos. It's within these you obtain jigsaw pieces. This was before Banjo would introduce us to Jiggies, mind you, which when all 8 are collected, grant you access to the 5th and final bonus island. Filled with the likes of enemies and bottomless pits, levels take on a very linear and enclosed approach, as each area is presented almost as a room, with every one of them being divided by loading screens. The general design isn't too bad, but there are a lot of moments that leave something major to be desired, especially when the challenge at hand calls for jumping up or across a series of identical platforms. I found that Croc is at its best when it isn't trying to be a platformer, when the charm and personality of Argonaut really shines through. This is a cartoon-ass game. You can enter a room and be presented with a type of shell game, or have to chase around a moving box, and it's those moments that I found myself enjoying the most. Island 4 has a pretty interesting physics puzzle where you have to push these stones to create a type of zigzag staircase, but it's only ever done once, and even then just barely since it's so easy to misjudge and cause everything to despawn. I should also mention that the islands are all themed after something different, like forest, ice, desert, castle, and crystal, each of which contain their very own gimmicks. These can be something as minute as slippery floors that cause Croc to slide around, or downright major like these dark areas that can only be lit up by fireflies. Think the bug missions from Crash Warped. You've got to move around as fast as you can before the light goes out, otherwise the gameplay quickly devolves into blind jumps that are sure to result in death. These, coupled with the incredibly annoying ghost races, all but cemented Island 3 as my least favorite of the bunch. Like, I can get down with some tank controls, honest. By the midpoint of Island 1, I was feeling good and finally getting the hang of things, but being forced to partake in a mad dash against a ghost that devours everything in its path, including the key to the final caged Gobbo, is never fun. It also isn't difficult, just kind of obnoxious. Along with the differently themed islands comes a whole slew of enemy types, the most common being the Dantinis, who are those little dudes helping Dante at the start. They come in all sorts of flavors, whether they charge, shoot fire, fly, or in very rare instances, outright avoid Croc while carrying a Gobbo. By no means a major threat, they can see you losing your crystals if you aren't careful, the devil ones being the main culprits. The little bastards shoot these balls of fire at you, and unless you're out of the way precisely when you need to be, they never miss. Then there are unique enemies like wellworms, mummies, and suits of armor, all of which only ever show up in specific areas, but add a nice bit of variety to the mix. The bosses, however, are very much hit and miss, hitting insofar as having their own levels, but missing in just about every other regard. All of them are island residents that have been corrupted by Dante's touch, though they're quick to revert back to their previous selves after getting a whooping from Croc. There are a few charming designs here and there, like a boxing ladybug and a crazy cactus monster, but what holds every one of them back is that they're all the same functionally. They attack for a bit before getting winded, which opens them up to get hit. Rinse and repeat a few times, and before you know it, it's off to the next level, and you're left wondering if that was really all it took. The only exceptions to this are Fosley, who floats in the air while tossing bombs, and Baron Dante, who, although follows the standard procedure of avoid an attack, is the sole multi-stage boss. If you think that's bad, wait till you get a load of this. Remember those jigsaw pieces that open the fifth and final island? Well, aside from having a few of the game's better levels, the entire thing culminates in a rematch against Dante, who, following his first defeat, is now a sort of crystallized ghost. How's it work? Well, he sends out waves of electricity, and the way to defeat him is by ringing the four surrounding gongs, which can be done in all of 10 seconds. It is quite possibly not only the lamest final boss in a game, but one that should have stayed hidden. Sure, the Gobbos are saved, peace reigns triumphant, and Croc is promised to return, but at what cost?
I'm honestly torn on how to feel about this game. Like, on one hand, I think it's a very cute, very unique 3D platformer that did the best with what it could. Remember, though this released in 1997, it had been in development since the days of the SNES, and even when it did finally come out, it wasn't like there was any playbook for designing 3D platformers. It should also be said that this game had very good graphics for the time it released, and also it has a great soundtrack. Anytime I heard the main theme or any variation of it, I was grooving like a big dumb idiot. But on the other hand, it's marred by lumbering tank controls and questionable design that is, at best, basic.
Still, that didn't stop Croc from performing well, even going on to become Argonaut's most successful work post-Nintendo. And though it would receive a sequel in 1999's Croc 2, the game would find itself with yet another release on the Game Boy Color of all things, except this time around, it wouldn't be a straightforward port. Developed by British studio Virtuecraft, Croc on the Game Boy Color is actually considered a remake. That's right, not a port, a remake. And it released after Croc 2, though before its very own GBC iteration. Acting as a standard 2D platformer, it sees Croc on a quest to, you guessed it, save his Gobbo buddies and thwart Baron Dante. He's still got his jump, tailspin, stomp, and climbing abilities, all of which are now accompanied by added jank. I'm just gonna get right down to it in saying that this has got to be one of the most unreliable games I have ever played. The tailspin is extremely finicky to work with, either coming out too late or missing altogether, which leaves the preferred means of attack as the stomp, and the platforming is oddly choppy, with Croc becoming dead weight as soon as he stops moving. Like, you can never hit jumps in quick succession, it's always a stop and go sort of deal. It's essentially a 2D remix of the 3D game. The levels aren't entirely derived from the original, but it's obvious that they were, at the very least, inspired by them. The forest, ice, desert, and castle settings are reused, as is the general idea of saving Gobbos and gathering special items to unlock doors. Only this time around, it's done so by finding the letters to spell the word bonus. Most of the minigames are faithful remakes of the originals, but newly added among them are slide puzzles, which are by far the worst. You're given so little time to solve them, and it didn't matter how many I managed to complete, I dreaded whenever they showed up. And as if to rub salt in the wound, the jigsaw pieces are used to unlock the fifth and final, which is of Croc. Yippee! Overall, it's just a mediocre iteration of an already flawed game. The hit detection is way off, the bosses are laughably basic with the same issues as before, and most of the levels drone on and on, with the only exceptions being the few vehicle-based ones. Huh. Imagine that. A platforming game where the vehicle levels are the best part. Why, I never.
It seems like poor Croc just couldn't catch a break. Despite all of the good stuff, like the premise, or the graphics, or the music, there are like 20 issues that pull it right back down. In a weird way, it actually makes me really excited to check out Croc 2, because it's a sequel. There is no better place to improve on mistakes than a sequel, and honestly, there is nowhere to go from here but up. Except maybe sideways for a quick pit stop? I'll see you then.